Just for your information, we will record this. So Gary, you could probably go ahead and start that now if you don't mind.
Thank you, it's on.
And we will get out the links to the recordings probably later this evening. It won't be immediately after we finish here today. Also, I've got a folder full of resources that we will email out to you as well. It'll have the PowerPoint and all the things we talked about, some other resources as well. So you will have access to all of those things, but we can't send them out until Zoom releases your contact information to us. So it won't be, like I said, it won't be right after this, but it'll be shortly after we finish today, maybe this evening. Again, I'll ask for questions in just a little bit, but if you would hold on those a few more minutes. All right, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tara. This is Tara Warwick up at the top, for me anyway. She's from Today's Therapy Solutions, and joining her is Kelly Marshall. We can't see Kelly right now, but they are going to present. Tara will do most of the talking. I'm kind of the moderator today. I'm Michele DeBerry. I'm from the State Department of Education. I'm a speech pathologist and school psychometrist. So you'll see my contact information at the end. If we don't somehow get to your question, you can always email me later, and we'll do our best between all of us to answer your questions. We want to make sure that you leave here fully knowing what you're doing, right? I know that's kind of scary right now. We're all in the same boat. We're here with you. So thank you so much for joining us today. So Tara, I'm going to let you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you guys for joining us. We had 1,000 people, and Kelly and I are like, oh my gosh, we've never talked in front of this many people. So we know that everybody's really wanting a whole lot of information. So today we're going to kind of go over just some general information. And like Michele said, open up for questions. I think what's hard about all this is that, you know, we can't tell you exactly what to do, but we can give you some guidance. And, you know, it's going to be very different based on what school district you're in, based on the families, based on the students. There's a lot of factors involved, as you guys all know. I want to thank you guys for those of you guys that have helped me and Kelly and like given us your input and reached out. It's been very helpful to get input from a variety of different people in different areas. So thinking about why we are here, I mean, as you guys know, on March 25th, Oklahoma decided to move to full distant learning for the remaining of the school year due to the COVID-19. So, you know, we're all here figuring out what is our part in that. How does this apply to special education? How does this apply to related services, to OT, PT, speech? And so that's why we're all here. And I think that, you know, during this time, it's challenging for all of us. You know, we've all been going, oh my gosh, how is this going to work? How is this going to happen? And I think as related service providers, it's really our time to support teachers, to support families, use our creativity, our innovation to reach those students and to make sure that we're taking care of those students, especially those students who you know, those more vulnerable students and that, you know, are at more risk. And so, so that's kind of why we're all here. And so we're, you know, going to walk through some things. I mean, there's a lot of, you know, a lot of great information on the State Department of website. And these are 3 key things to look at when, you know, we're looking at distance learning, is making sure that we are keeping students at the center of all this, that they are our priority. You know, our priority is to keep everybody safe and everybody healthy, and thinking about what do those students need. Looking at opportunities, designing learning for equity and access. And so how can we provide opportunities for all students to learn the best that we can? You know, we're limited right now, and we can only do the best that we can do. And how do we assess student learning? How do we make sure that there is some type of learning happening, and how can we check in with families, and how can we provide those opportunities? So thinking about, you know, different types of services through distant learning, we're kind of categorizing it as either that non-technological distance learning and then telehealth. So we're going to hit it on the non-technological distance learning for a little bit, and then looking at the telehealth piece of it. The non-technical, that's a long word, non-technological distance learning would be those things that might involve emails back and forth with families, phone calls, maybe a lot of schools I've talked to are developing those therapists develop packets and sending them to families. So families who might not have access to internet or to computers, how can we reach some of those families through those therapist developed packets? And I know a lot of providers are really using a lot of creativity right now and innovation on figuring out how we can provide those types of resources to families. And then looking at the interventions, these are some different examples of how these interventions might fit into your current category. So your direct services, maybe now direct is going to be more those live meetings with your students over the computer with audio and video. Student participated is facilitated by the caregiver. I think, I've been doing a lot of, not a lot, but I've been doing telehealth for the past 2 weeks. It feels like I've been doing a lot, but, I've really had to think about my services are targeting more the families, especially for the younger ones. So I'm still direct services, but I'm really trying to help coach those families through situations via live meetings. Monitoring might include, sending packets, those supplemental videos, worksheets, handouts of therapeutic activities. I'm going to show you a template here in a minute that you could use. And then that collaboration would be working with the teachers and their caregivers to put things in place or modifications for that distant learning. So is there modifications that those students might need in order to access that distance learning, and how can we as providers collaborate with teachers and caregivers to make sure they're getting access to that information. So these therapists develop packets. A lot of therapists right now that I've talked to are really, like I said, being very creative and finding a lot of different opportunities to provide instruction. So some things to think about if you're going to use this as a strategy is making sure the language is simple, the simple language and instruction. So you break it down into small, real simple steps for families, knowing that, being aware of, what is maybe the family, what kind of understanding might they have, and having it to where all families would understand. Maybe providing some printable and electronic options for families if they can access the internet. Identifying what that target skill is in that packet, so that way you can relate it to an IEP goal, that this is what we're working on. You might have to change the wording a little bit, simplify it a little bit, provide some recommendations. So I know as a parent, if you just sent me a packet, I'd like, okay, now what do I do? I need to know how often do I need to practice this with my child, and about how long do I need to practice? So having some guidelines for the families around that, providing materials if you can. If you can't, could you give them a list of materials that might be needed for that packet? Also implementing it within their routine. So giving them some ideas on how you can implement this within their daily routine. Okay, that might be really hard for them, but saying, okay, you can practice, putting your socks and shoes on when you're getting dressed or when you're getting out of the shower, or whatever it might be. So, but helping them see that you don't just have to practice this skill during this time, you can embed that throughout the day. And then looking at how you're going to help them monitor progress. I'm going to give you an example here in a minute on that, but looking at how you can see if that child how they're monitoring, how they're doing with that goal. Some other things to consider is maybe is for sure your contact information. If you don't feel like giving out your cell phone number to everybody, you can get a free Google phone number, and that will get directed to your cell phone. So that you might want to consider something like that. Maybe having options for time for follow-up that you could put on there that say, okay, during this time, you can call me, you can email me, and we can have some back and forth conversations about this. Just making sure you're following that CDC approved social distancing for your distribution of those packets. Here are just a couple different examples, thanks to some of my wonderful therapy friends in Edmond. They gave us some examples of maybe an introductory letter to some services. So, and we can send out we'll send you guys out the PowerPoint along with this after it's recorded. I don't want to read this to you, but I wanted to have you an example. Here's an example for occupational therapy. Just kind of what to expect. You might be getting in weekly emails, whatever that is that you're going to be providing as a related service provider, kind of listing that out. I know for my kids, it was nice getting an email from the teacher saying, okay, every Monday you're going to get this email with what to do. And then most kids will do this many times a day. So they said, you're going to do this 3 to 5 times a day, and it's about 30 minutes. So when those clear expectations for me, it was a lot easier and more manageable for me than just saying, here you go, here's what to do. So giving them some guidelines about how often and how long it's going to take can be really helpful. And then here's an example too on a speech therapy letter. So I appreciate the therapist that sent me this, some speech and OTs from Edmond. And so these are just some different types of examples about phone calls, Zoom meetings, just those expectations. Here is a sample template for parents. So this could go, it's just an example of something I made in Word that could go on the packet that has the student name, parent contact information, the type of service, the service provider's name, so all the contact information. And then having what is that name of that activity? What is the target goal? How often are you going to practice that? How long to practice? And how will I keep track of the progress? And then maybe other ways to practice this goal. So giving them websites, videos, maybe some of the OETA programs that might help with that skill. You could put it on this. So this is just something we made in Word. We can send this out too. It's just a simple little table that we created. Here's another, I thought was a nice way that you could incorporate this into your parent packet too, and have conversations with families about how they're doing on that certain objective. So having, what is this objective, and then them rating themselves. So you can make up your own rating scale on a scale of 1 to 5. How do you feel that your child did on this skill this week? So you could look at, they're doing worse on it, they're progressing, they're maintaining, they're making progress, they're making exceptional. So having some kind of rating system would be another way that you could just kind of get a sense of how the family's doing working on that skill. Okay, so those are those packets. The other option too, and it probably will be a combination for most, is looking at telehealth. And so this is the American Telemedicine Association definition of telehealth, just the remote delivery of healthcare services and clinical information using telecommunication technology. So, just thinking about how that's going to look for your students. Some school team considerations for telehealth. And so taking this back to your schools, to let them see there's things that we need to consider when we're looking at telehealth. First we need to make sure all providers meet the state requirements to practice telehealth. Make certain that all providers have the training, knowledge, and skills to use telehealth, that they know how to use the platforms, they know how to set up sessions and do all that with telehealth. Inform parents that they have the right to decline it. If they choose, provide parents with those satisfaction surveys, so something that I showed you earlier, or some ways to provide some feedback about the telehealth will be good practice. Provide opportunities to discuss concerns about their child's progress, so have some way that families can interact about progress. Making sure, a big thing out of all this is that you're documenting everything that happens. So document service delivery via telehealth in your written notice sent to the parent following any amendment to the IEP. So, and we're going to address this concern here in a little bit, a frequently asked question, but really making sure that you are documenting any attempts that you're making. If you're attempting to phone calls, emails, anything, if you are having telehealth, that you are documenting everything that you're doing. And then just looking at those policies for your school that ensure that protection of that privacy. during those services. So here is a document form that the State Department of Ed put out, and that is an amendment to the IEP. Michelle, let me have you talk about this form here, if you don't mind.
So, and Dia, you asked this question, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, but this is a form that we created, or that we basically borrowed off of Washington State, I believe. And it's just a tracking log. It just will help you. It's optional. We're not requiring that you use it, but it's just to help you document any services that are different. We want IEPs to stand in place from what they were before spring break, and hopefully when we come back in August, we'll be able to pick up and keep on running. But for our kids that have some amendment, yes, we definitely need to document that in written notice. You can also use this form, and it's attached in the resources. Yes, you need to use written notice. Always use written notice. If you make any changes, if you communicate with the parent, if a decision is made, like Tara said earlier, I want you to document. If you don't document, it didn't happen, okay? So school team can come in and make any kind of slight changes to this. If you're not having to change the whole IEP, you can make some slight changes to this, do the written notice, and come back.
Okay. And so then some things to think about for your IEP teams when considering telehealth is, how is the services going to be provided? How will it be scheduled? What is the frequency? Looking back at what your IEP currently says, what are the dates, the session links about how long are they going to be, what providers are going to be doing telehealth, and then that method of service provision. So what kind of platform you're going to use, how are you going to follow up. I'm going to give some examples of some other considerations too. And then your ethical considerations from a provider performing telehealth is, making sure inform the family regarding the implications of telehealth versus an in-person. Right now, we don't have the option of in-person service delivery model, but just making sure we're informing them about telehealth. Abide by your laws, your scope of practice when using telehealth. So really looking back at what does your Practice Act say and what does your licensure say regarding telehealth. Still adhering to your professional standards. So telehealth should not decrease the quality of services that you're doing. It will look different, but we still want to maintain a high quality in our service delivery. Understand and abide approaches that ensure that privacy, security, and confidentiality are not compromised as a result of using telehealth. So also, security related to health information, and making sure you're assessing the effectiveness of interventions. So once again, using some kind of maybe a measurement scale or some way to keep data to see how if your interventions are making a difference. Really recognizing the need to be culturally competent. So with language, ethnicity, socioeconomic, educational backgrounds that might affect the quality of the services that you're providing. And then making sure that all services, activities are in their proper working order and properly calibrated when you're doing telehealth services. In regards to licensure, referring to your state guidelines and Practice Act for any additional requirements and ethical considerations. So looking at that for Oklahoma Physical Therapy Association, Oklahoma Occupational Therapy Association, OBESTA to look at the licensure exactly what it says for telehealth. And then thinking about different types of telehealth. So there's synchronous, asynchronous, and there's hybrid. So synchronous means that it's live, so it's in real time. So it's like what we're doing right now. It's between student and provider via audio and video. So it's in real moment happening. But there's also asynchronous. So it might be, it's called the store and forward data transmission. So it might be like, I'm going to have the family take a video clip and I'm going to review that as a provider. or I'm going to have them take a picture of positioning, and I'm going to give them some strategies on how to get a better position when they're sitting at their desk. So I'm giving them that. It's more that asynchronous type. So it's not live in the moment, but I'm giving them feedback on that. And then there's also a hybrid approach, which probably will be a lot of what we do. Is there'll be some live and some asynchronous. Okay, so that mixture of different approaches.
Sarah, can I butt in for just a second?
Yes.
We're getting a ton of questions about amending IEPs, and we will come back to that. So we'll cover that completely at the end or whatever. No, we don't want you to amend 90 plus or however many IEPs to teletherapy. That can be done with written notice. But again, let us answer all your questions first, and we'll come back to that because I think that there's some nuances there that you'll need to hear.
And we're going to talk about groups here in a minute too. So yeah, so save your questions, and then we'll probably address quite a bit of, because these are questions that we've been receiving a lot of that we'll address. So selecting a platform, make sure you look at the full product description, subscription details, pricing, seeing how easy it is to create a session for others to join a session. I've tried some platforms before where it was like you had to download all this fancy software and it just wasn't very user-friendly. So making sure that you're picking something that's user-friendly on both ends. A lot of them have trial periods now. I know a lot of people are using Zoom, and Zoom has a free account through that they'll provide school-based providers. So looking to see if there's some trial periods, and looking at how many hosts and how many attendees can join depending on what type of, how you're using it. Also looking at any kind of technical support, how quickly do they get back with people, and looking at the Hipaa and Ferpa compliance. So, most schools will only require Ferpa compliance. Best practice is for OT, PT, and speech to also, as medical providers, to be Hipaa compliant, but also, at this time they have, lifted some of the Hipaa requirements for that. So the guidelines are a little looser there. So that's just something that you'll have to decide as a school team what avenue you want to go to. All of them that are HIPAA compliant they cost. Okay, so if you're going to be FERPA and HIPAA, it's going to cost something. Usually around $20 a month for a provider is around the going rate. And then looking at your telehealth tools, looking at what type of camera that you might need. I use now a webcam that's separate from my computer, so I can have two screens at once, and that's really helpful when I'm doing telehealth, so I can see certain things on one screen and certain things on the other screen. So looking at like your monitor, your microphone and speaker quality, so making sure that people on the other end can hear you really well, because that's the biggest complaint, is when the people can't hear each other. Okay, and when you are, limited communication over virtually, you really have to have your audio good. And then some other considerations for technology is, can you screen share, annotation, whiteboard. I used whiteboards yesterday in a session where I could write out a list of schedule that I could share back and forth with a student. Can you share mouse controls? So I've had to use that with kids who are wanting to do some online activities, and I can share my mouse with them, and then they can take over my computer. So all those things are things that help make your session more effective. And so, a lot of questions about group services. Group therapy is a local district decision. So it's recommended that LEAs consult with their legal counsel and consider a waiver for families of students who receive special ed services and who will participate in group instruction. And at this time, group instruction is not billable for Medicaid reimbursement. So here is an example letter, a parent consent for release of confidential group e-learning teletherapy, because we know that if, we worry about FERPA, right? If you have all these kids in a group, everybody can see each other in their homes and all that. And so this addresses that confidentiality for group services, but it is a local district decision.
So this Michelle? Was guidance. Yeah, this was guidance that we were just given this morning. So it's been kind of back and forth this week, and you guys were learning all of this as you are, and have people telling us yes and no too. So this was guidance given to us this morning. This sample waiver will be in the packet of information that I email out to you later. But again, we're recommending to districts that they consult with their legal counsel, whether they use this kind of waiver or in addition something else. Again, that's going to be a local district decision.
Okay, and then the billing Medicaid, we have more, we're still waiting to hear officially on that, correct? Sorry, Michelle, did you want to say anything more on that?
No, we don't have a lot of information with that right now. We're still waiting.
Some considerations for evaluations. So, you know, looking at, you can do evaluations via telehealth, but just because you can and there's tools available doesn't mean that it's always best practice. And so, you know, OSET said that it's okay if you're not meeting that timeline. But really thinking about, you know, if I do this evaluation with this student, am I going to get a good picture of what that student needs for the school year? So kind of thinking about those things as you're making these decisions. Looking at the reliability, the validity of those tools when administering remotely. So seeing if the tool was even validated for remote, for giving it remotely. If you really need to do it right now, make sure you're documenting why you're doing it now and what you did to gather information. Thinking about their healthcare needs, what's their access to technology, and how can you measure outcomes through all this? I think about, you know, a lot of kids, if you try to do a test with them, you know, virtually, like, I mean, their routines are completely off. Their whole day is everybody's routines are off. So are you really going to get the best picture of that child during this time? Some more considerations is making sure that you're still adhering to those copyright laws and requirements when administering those protocols. And then if there are any kinds of protocols that require modification, making sure that you are documenting why and what you did. You guys have probably heard that, and I shared it on our Facebook page about the Pearson. So Pearson through Q Global is putting a lot of their protocols and their stimulus books free that you can access online now. So that's another really good resource. But once again, just making sure that just because you can do it, is that really best practice right now? Are you going to get the best picture of that student right now? Michelle, did you have anything more to add on the evaluation piece of it?
No, I think that pretty much covers it.
Okay. And so we're going to get into some frequently asked questions. These are some questions that we were sent. Are we able to perform standardized assessments virtually? You're going to have to look at the validation of the test to see if it can be done virtually. And if there's no validation and you still decide to use it for one reason or another, making sure you're documenting why you're doing that. Do I need to change all the minutes on my IEPs? Michelle hit on that. Michelle, did you want to add anything more on that?
Again, that's going to be a team decision. It's not something that we can say, yes, you have to do this with 100% of your IEPs, or no, you don't. You need to look at that as a team. And
then do we have to change the IEP to reflect distance learning? No, because I mean, all kids are moving to distant learning. Right, Michelle? So we don't have to reflect that we're changing from, you know, in-person to distant, because all kids are moving to distant learning. And it's the same with informed consent.
We did just have a question. If you do packets for some students in an online platform, teletherapy of some type, for other students. Is that okay? And I would say yes, because again, it's an individual student decision. Don't make blanket policies like we're going to see all students for 30 minutes once a week. That's a blanket policy. You're not considering each child individually. So, you know, some students, some families are going to work better or prefer a packet. Some students are going to be able to respond in some kind of online platform or virtual environment, whether it's Google Hangouts or FaceTime or whatever platform that you and your district decide. So again, just think of all of your students as individuals rather than making blanket policies and decisions.
There was a few questions earlier, Michelle, on sooner start.
Mm-hmm.
Kids that are transitioning in at 3, if it's best to go ahead and do it and move forward or to wait.
So I talked with some of our folks from Sooner Start yesterday, and they had a large number of students that were in the process of being evaluated. So those are little bitties coming into Sooner Start. So we're working on that, but we also have, you know, a large number of kids coming from Sooner Start into us. Again, the same evaluation procedures are in place. If Sooner Start's already done some good evaluations and you can make eligibility and placement decisions and develop an IEP from the information that you have that Sooner Start has, then by all means, go ahead and keep your compliance dates intact and move on down the road with that. If you feel like you don't have enough information, or that you have enough information but you'll still need to do testing later on down the line, then again, those are all things that you can consider for each student, each kiddo as they come up.
So there's a question about consent. So the only time you would need consent would be if your district chooses to do group services and your district decides to do, to get a consent from each kid that's going to be in that group. Correct, Michelle?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, it's Todd. Let me address a couple things. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Some people are asking about consent and all of these things. Yes, so we have a sample form for consent. Who actually obtains that consent? There's no separate consents going on because yes, you're getting consent for group therapy. Everything is going to be an individualized IEP team decision. So I see some questions about, you know, would this suffice or that suffice? You're going to have conversations with your IEP teams, including the parents, on what services will be available to provide to the kid, and that you as an IEP team think will provide some meaningful services to the students for the remainder of the year. I saw someone ask, you know, just is it a platform our district chooses? And I don't imagine districts will just pick a platform and say, you must use this, and that's not what we will be doing either. So I'm hoping whatever your district you're working with, we don't want people to use things they aren't familiar with. So if you're familiar with a particular platform and you believe that it covers you enough, then that's fine. Use that. You can, so not all special ed teachers have to get these same consents signed for doing an online video platform. We don't want parents signing a bunch of different consents. You are able to do an electronic signature through various platforms like Zoom. You can share your screen. We actually have a video posted to the website now showing people how to do that. You can also, you know, just like when you have a phone conference or anything like that, you know, you're putting that down and documenting it. I saw someone saying you can mail things home, you can email. There's a lot of different options available to you. What we're trying to do is be as flexible as possible and just kind of get everybody on the same page of thinking, you know, given all of this in this environment, what can we accomplish here? I saw some questions about evaluations, and the answer to that is going to be the same for everything. If you can't do an evaluation because it requires to be done in person, then obviously you cannot do that. What you could do though is look at any data that you could get through an assessment that could be done virtually, or information you received previously, and work with students' teachers, especially if they're not eligible yet, to provide some kind of accommodations or interventions that aren't specially designed instruction or related services. So everyone's free to do those kinds of things. And we're saying that we don't want people to just amend every IEP, because there's 116,000 IEPs in the state. And like Michelle and Tara were saying earlier, the gen ed environment is distance learning currently. So whatever your district is doing as distance learning, that's the gen ed environment for right now for these next 4 to 5 weeks. So be thinking about how you're providing services in light of that. And if you may need to change an IEP, you may need to attach a document to the IEP to show what you're providing now. Some districts have taken different ways to do that. What's going to be really key is helping parents understand what exactly you're doing for their child during this time. And Brandy, someone's asking us how we're getting signatures on IEP. So again, we have an electronic signature function on the IEP. And if you notice on the IEP, it says agree or disagree. So when we're signing the IEP, that's indicating who participated in the IEP meeting, right? Because we always send written notice after an IEP meeting to say this is what's going to be provided, that kind of thing. So it's not in and of itself an entire agreement. That's who was all there. But there are different platforms you can use to be able to get electronic signatures. And yes, on Zoom, you can share your screen, give control and access. I could get access from Michelle right now or Tara and take over the screen right now. So the same way on the electronic signatures, and there's again a video on our homepage. It should be, I just put that on about an hour ago. It should be published on there soon. And so someone's asking about the virtual platform you're using. Yeah, if whichever virtual platform you're using that you think works, you should use that platform, unless you have some kind of concern with it, unless your district has some kind of concern with it. I don't imagine they will be. Yes, and when you share your screen and sign it, you're sharing control of your screen, by the way. Everyone should watch the video and that would give you a better idea, but it would save the signatures in that plan.
Hey, Todd, do you want to address changing the minutes in the IEP? You were talking earlier about when you teach, you don't really stand up in front of students and teach for 60 minutes.
Yeah, so you're going to need to be thinking of, we always have also I'll say this, and when we're writing special ed or related services in an IEP, we're not in general, and I know this because we've all read thousands of IEPs, we don't often spell out exactly what's happening during that time period, okay? So just like in a regular ed classroom, it's not always the case that a teacher's standing up and providing instruction for 50 minutes talking to children. Normally we think of that as bad teaching, right? So, you're giving an assignment and that's going to take a certain amount of time. We also have to reflect on the fact that there are parents that do not have 6 hours in a day to be doing all of this. They may have multiple children with multiple related service providers. So we want to make sure that we're not overwhelming parents. Even virtually, not everyone has a laptop for every person in their household. I'm willing to bet most people do not. So it's, we want to give people enough to do. We want to make sure that parents are able to provide that service or be able to work through whatever packet you've given them, things like that. So, we need to be flexible with our expectations of parents also. And in the end, okay, there will be a time to reflect on our students' progress that they've made and provide additional services supports as determined by an IEP team.
Tara, can you go to the next slide?
Let me say this real quick. If parents don't want a service, that's fine. You should you should document that, and you may later need to provide some services, but it's not always the case that a missed service results in a compensatory service. Okay, it's not very black and white, but that's not always true.
So if parents, we've always, you guys remember, we've always done phone conferences for parents that have not been able to attend IEPs for whatever reason, way past spring break, I mean, before spring break. You know, there are lots of times that I've had to call a parent with a team involved, you know, in the room or on the phone with me, and, you know, go through the IEP because the parent was working or a parent was out of town or whatever. So you just document that, that you had the meeting via phone or whatever platform with the parent. Be sure to send their parent rights and the survey, you know, anything like that that you would normally do for any other IEP meeting. That part hasn't changed. And you just include that on the signature line that you had the meeting by phone or whatever way, and then be sure and document everything that you've done in written notice as well. So the distance learning guidance that came out at the end of last week, first of this week, we have updated that as of, or it will be updated later today. We've got the information today saying that, yes, if a district, it's a local district decision, but if the district wants to provide therapy or services in groups, that they can do that.
It is updated.
Okay, perfect. Progress reports, I just wanted to touch on that. Yes, we need to do progress reports. We need to be able to, for this quarter, we need to see what things are going on with the students. Tara gave you an example earlier in the slideshow of like a progress report that the parent could help report on. But you need to do progress reports as they are written, or as you've documented already in the IEP at whatever frequency you've documented. And this will also help you document either what progress or potentially any regression that's happened, so that, you know, if we do need to add services, compensatory services later, and that's not a punitive term right now, because we know probably a lot of our kids are going to regress, we're going to have to add services later, potentially. And so we want to be able to document where the students were. So Tara, you want to address SLPAs, OTAs, PTAs? Tara, you're still on mute, sorry.
Going back to your Practice Act to look for OTs, we and OTAs can. And so I think looking back at your Practice Act to make sure that you're covered for speech, PT, and OT.
You can, for emails or information you've talked with parents on, you can document that. Use your contact log in EdPlan. That helps us too, because if we have parents call us later and say, well, I didn't know all of this was happening, but you've already documented in your contact log when you've talked with them, you know, you can document that you've received an email. Yes, you can upload emails as a document, as an external document in the Documents tab as well. Again, I would avoid saying all of my students are going to receive services 48 times a year or whatever. Again, because you need to address that as an individual team and individual student decision. If the parent doesn't respond or if they decline, again, you've already documented that on written notice, and that the parent did not respond or did not give you any information, any feedback. But I would make sure you contact them more than once and more than one way to try to see if you can get a response for them. be sure and watch, if they're coming through to get lunch, if they're coming through and visiting with your child nutrition, if your cafeteria workers know them, know the student, that might be a way. We don't want, parents to interact. We don't want to stop them in the car line too long, but that might be a way that you can say, hey, your teacher's trying to call you. Yes, you need to document all contacts in the contact log and ed plan. That's a great place to do it. That's the place to do it. Tara, you want to answer Kelly, the OTPT services about Medicaid?
Our OTPT services are through a contract provider that bills Sooner Care Medicaid. Will they be able to continue the services and bill? So they should be billing through the school Medicaid. So that is something which is different than our outpatient Medicaid. And so that is what we're still waiting on, is to hear from the school-based services about how to proceed with billing Medicaid.
Do you need to put all teletherapy contacts in the contact log? If you're already seeing them on a regular basis, if you've already made that arrangement, it's already in written notice, then as a therapist, I document when I see students and keep that for my records in case a parent was ever to say, you didn't see my kid, or, to monitor progress as you take those logs after you've seen a kid. That's your documentation that you've seen a student. I don't know that you would need to do an addendum if you're changing service from 2 times a week to 1 time a week because of the parent schedule, but I would use that tracking form to document that and make sure that you follow up with a written notice. Grades, from what I understand, grades are not frozen. Students have an opportunity to increase. They have an opportunity to improve their grades. I've included in the resources that I'll send you the frequently asked questions that Superintendent Hoffmeister has done for the whole state, and they thoroughly address grades in there. But yes, we do need to monitor progress for the 4th quarter. When there's a Medicaid, when we get information about that, that's going to be on our webpage on the special ed homepage. I'll also try to put it on Facebook if you're following us on Facebook, just as a reminder to look there for that. Teletherapy with bilingual families. Again, that would just be like having an IEP with a meeting with a bilingual family. You'll need to find someone that can translate. Well, a lot of times the student speaks English, but maybe the parents don't. So again, you'll just have to work with the individual families on that.
Somebody asked about specific qualifications needed for SLPD's telehealth. No, there's no qualifications for it. There's different levels for Zoom. So there's like the free Zoom, and then there's the Zoom for school-based providers. And then there's the Zoom for healthcare providers. So the one that's for healthcare providers is Hipaa compliant, but it costs. The one for school-based services is the one that they're offering for free now. So, so that's, yeah. So no qualifications required.
So if you are a speech path and want to do telehealth, look up on ASHA's webpage. They're very thorough about what the requirements are. Again, right now, if you're doing therapy through Google Hangout or some other form such as Zoom, they want to make sure that you're familiar with the platform and that you are competent in using the method that you're doing that. I would do documentation of teletherapy and the frequency, office hours, or anything else like that. I would do that in written notice. What other questions do you have? If you could put those in the chat box, that would help us. Any of the external documents that you use, like the tracking log or any form that you might create in your district, just upload that as an external document on the Documents tab. You would just upload that like you're uploading something from your computer. No, you don't need to do written notice every time you see a student. You just need to document how often you're going to see them, the frequency, that kind of thing. Anything that's a change to what's written in the current IEP. And we understand that students across our state have access to different platforms. Some have internet, a lot don't. Some might not have access to OETA, some do. So we anticipate students will receive different types of services. But again, look at that as an individual student. Todd, can you answer the question about teletherapy outside of school or office hours?
Yeah, I had plenty of IEP meetings outside of school hours. So, I mean, I think that if we're, everyone's serious about working together and getting through this time, then, and I realize that everyone has personal lives too. I mean, so do we, and teachers have, their kids at home too during the day and all of this. I think that we need to work together to, do our best. I don't think we need to be doing teletherapy at 10 o'clock at night, but I think, we should do what we can.
Amy, in the PowerPoint a little bit earlier, there is a form that parents can respond to as an example for documenting progress during this time if you were to send home packets and not have any contact. If you don't have any contact with families, you're just sending home packets, I would recommend that you at least let your families know what office hours you're going to have, and that you would be available to them for either by phone or Google or whatever platform or email, so that if they do have questions or concerns that you are communicating with them. And I think that would help you as therapists say, hey, family, this is a great time that I need to be hooked up to my computer for a little bit, but that you're not sitting there all day. But that parents know that they have an open line of communication with you. Making up services, we'll probably come out with some information about ESY later, but compensatory services, I'm guessing we probably aren't going to look at that until the fall. Todd may correct me.
I didn't hear you. I was reading the chat box. If everybody could respond to everybody on the chat box, like all panelists and attendees, that would be helpful when you're asking a question.
So the question was asked, if we're making up services, does that need to be done in the summer or when school starts in the fall? Said we would probably send out some guidance about ESY soon, but
yeah, I just want to make it clear that these are all IEP team decisions. So, think about, in the summer, we still may be in a similar position where all schools are closed. ESY is most likely going to have to be done virtually. In the same way we're kind of doing things now. So that needs to be taken into consideration. A lot of people are going to have different ideas about how to provide services, how to do all of this. Shannon, the compensatory services are to when a FAPE wasn't provided according to the IEP, and you're making that service up. ESY is different because we're thinking of, given that this student's amounts outside of school for this amount of time, do we think that they're going to need some continued services to keep up? So they're different in that regard. We've said that you may need to consider ESY services again because, you know, like in February, you were looking at ESY in terms of the student's going to be out for the summer. But now we might need to reconsider that for some students because the time period they're really away is longer than the summertime. And some people keep asking about a written notice. So a written notice is used to document, it's used to inform someone of any time the LA refuses or proposes to take an action, which is why we keep saying you should document these things through a written notice, because you're keeping everybody on the same page. This is what we've all decided. This is how we're moving forward. So I would not just document that in Ed Plan, but like in the parent contact log. You know, progress reports are going to be difficult, obviously. This is why we're suggesting that we focus on some specific goals for whatever therapy they're receiving, including for their special education services, and attempting to, as much as we possibly can, document progress. This is different from getting a grade in a class. It's never been the same thing. So what we're suggesting on that is that we will need to see, you will as teachers and related service providers, you need to have some kind of baseline when when we return to normal school operations to determine what, if any, services do we need to increase or what do we need to do. So someone's asking me to be specific. Do all students need a written notice saying they will be receiving distance learning? All students are receiving distance learning. So most students are going to need some kind of documentation, like a written notice for parents after you talk with your parents or someone on the IEP team talks with parents to determine what distance learning is going to look like for their child. And these again are all IEP team decisions. So we can't tell you per child exactly what you should do across the board. Again, there's 116,000 kids out there with various related and special education services. But what we're saying is look at that IEP, look at what services they need, consider how you could provide the same level of service through a distance learning environment. However your district is going about that. Your district may be doing virtual learning and sending home packets depending on their context and the context of families. The idea is to get each individual student what they need.
All right, well, it's 3:15 and we've got to get to another call. So I'm going to end this now. Thank you so much, Tara and Kelly. We appreciate you. Thank you, Todd and Krista, for helping us as well. Again, thank you for participating. I've included my email in the chat. If for some reason you didn't get your question answered and you look through all the resources we're going to send later tonight, if your question is still burning in your mind, please don't hesitate to send me an email. I don't mind at all. But I hope that a lot of the information that we send out later this evening, again, it won't be in like 20 or 30 minutes, it'll be this evening. I hope that will answer some of your questions. But again, if it doesn't, please don't hesitate to email me and we will figure out a way to get your questions answered. Thank you guys. You're doing great. Hang in there. Bye.